I never thought that one day I'd feel like a stranger in the very house I built with my own hands. It all started 3 years after my husband, Richard, passed away. We'd been married for almost 40 years. 40 years of laughter, savings, sacrifice, and building this home brick by brick. Every tile, every creak in the wooden floor held a memory of us. After his death, I lived alone. At first, I liked the quiet. The walls still carried his voice. The garden still bloomed where he'd planted roses for me every spring. But slowly, silence turned heavy. So when my son, David, suggested that he and his wife, Clara, move in with me to help around the house, I agreed, maybe too quickly. I thought it would be nice to have company again. I thought we'd share dinners, laughter, and warmth. But I was wrong. At first, Clara seemed polite, almost overly so. She called me Mrs. Gray instead of Mom, even though I told her she didn't have to. She'd smile, but her eyes were sharp, measuring. When they first moved in, she brought in an army of boxes, clothes, furniture, things they didn't even need. She decorated my house as if she were the new owner. "Don't worry, Mom," David said one afternoon, placing his arm around me. "Clara's just trying to make it feel more modern. You'll love it once it's done." But I didn't love it. My old oak dining table, gone. The floral curtains Richard and I picked out, replaced with gray blinds. And my kitchen, my sacred kitchen, where I'd cooked every family meal. Suddenly, I wasn't allowed to touch anything. Clara started ordering groceries online, filling the pantry with expensive brands I'd never heard of. "Mom," she'd say, with that sugary tone that dripped like honey over broken glass, "I'll handle the cooking from now on. You can just relax." Relax. So I tried. I sat in the living room, staring out the window, listening to my own house hum with voices that didn't sound like mine. Then came the first time she called me the Maid. It was a Sunday morning. They'd invited some friends over, young couples, all polished smiles and perfect hair. I stayed quiet, busying myself in the kitchen, slicing fruit and pouring drinks. I overheard Clara say to her guests, "Oh, don't mind her, that's just David's mom. She helps around the house, kind of like our live-in maid." The words hit me like cold water. Her friends laughed lightly, not realizing the cruelty behind her tone. I turned my back and pretended I didn't hear. My hands trembled so much I nearly dropped the knife. That night, I told David what she said. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, I'm sure she didn't mean it that way. You're overthinking. Clara just jokes sometimes." But I wasn't laughing. Weeks passed. The small humiliations grew. She'd leave dirty dishes and say, "Oh, could you take care of that, Mrs. Gray?" Or drop her laundry basket by the door with a sweet smile. "You're so good at folding clothes, better than any housekeeper." And David, he changed too. He stopped joining me for morning tea. He started coming home late, spending more time on his phone, less time talking. One evening, I made dinner like I used to, his favorite roast chicken with rosemary. I spent hours preparing it, hoping to bring back that old warmth. When I set the table, Clara looked at the meal, then at me. "Is this healthy?" she asked. "David's on a low-carb diet now. You should have checked with me before cooking." Before I could reply, David chimed in, "Yeah, Mom, Clara's right. You know, maybe just relax next time. We've got this." Relax. Again that word. I quietly gathered my plate and ate alone in the kitchen. Then came the day I overheard something that broke me. I was upstairs, folding my own laundry, the one thing Clara hadn't taken from me yet, when I heard them talking downstairs. "She's nice," David said hesitantly. Clara snorted. "Nice? She's old, David. She's living in our house for free. You think I'm going to tiptoe around her forever?" "Our house?" he echoed. "Of course," Clara said smoothly. "You're her only son. Eventually it'll be ours anyway. Might as well start treating it like that now." My hands froze. I gripped the fabric so tightly I thought it might tear. Our house? The one Richard and I worked our entire lives for? That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window until the sky turned gray with dawn. The next morning, I made a quiet decision. If they wanted to treat me like a maid, I would let them. If they thought I was powerless, I would stay silent. Because sometimes silence is the sharpest knife of all. Over the next few months, I watched, listened, and waited. Clara took over the finances, convincing David to handle my pension money so I wouldn't have to worry about bills. She redecorated again, sold my antique china set for storage space. And one day, when I went to make tea, I noticed my teapot, the one Richard gave me on our 25th anniversary, was gone. When I asked, she shrugged. "Oh, that old thing? I gave it to the cleaner. It looked too worn." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I smiled instead. "That's fine, dear." Because by then, I had already contacted my lawyer. You see, Richard and I had a plan, a will we'd written years ago, long before Clara came into the picture. But after he passed, I updated it quietly, with one small but crucial change. And in that new version, the house, my home, would never belong to David or Clara. Instead, it was to go to Grace House, a local charity for single mothers rebuilding their lives. Richard always said, "Our home should always shelter love." I decided to honor that, even if my own family forgot what love looked like. Weeks later, Clara threw a dinner party. She invited her friends, her co-workers, even her mother, all dressed to impress, clinking glasses and laughing. She strutted around, giving tours, showing off the house as if it were her own. "This kitchen was such a mess before I redid it," she said proudly. "Now, it finally looks decent." I stood quietly in the corner, holding a tray of appetizers like a servant. One of her friends smiled at me and said, "Oh, you have such a sweet maid." Clara laughed. "Yes, she's been with us a long time." My eyes met hers across the room. I smiled, but this time not out of weakness, because I knew something she didn't. The next morning, I would visit my lawyer and finalize everything. And when the day came, the day the lawyer finally read the will, Clara would learn that the woman she called the maid was, in fact, the one holding all the power. The house felt heavier after that day. Not because anything changed. The walls were still white, the clock still ticked the same rhythm, but because something inside me had cracked. When your own family begins to see you as less than human, even silence feels loud. I stopped correcting her when she called me the maid. Maybe because it hurt too much to care anymore. Every morning, I'd hear her slippers scraping across the marble floor before the sunrise, her voice echoing through the kitchen, sharp, commanding. "Mother, don't forget to clean the porch today. The guests are coming." "Mother, the laundry from yesterday, fold it properly this time." She said it with such authority, as if she'd been the one to build these walls, pay these bills, and hold this family together. But what could I say? My son, Armin, had stopped listening long ago. Whenever I tried to tell him how his wife spoke to me, he'd sigh and change the subject. "Mom, you always take things too personally. She's just being straightforward. You know how young people are." "No, son, this isn't young people being straightforward. This is cruelty, the slow kind that hides behind smiles and politeness when others are watching. I remember one morning when I caught her looking at me, really looking. I had just finished mopping the floor, my hands red and swollen from the cold water. She was standing by the kitchen island, sipping her coffee from a gold-rimmed mug, her silk robe tied neatly at the waist. For a moment, her eyes softened, just a flicker. Then she turned away and said, "You missed a spot." That was it. That was my life now. I used to have friends, you know, women I'd meet for tea, laughter that would fill entire afternoons. But one by one, those invitations stopped coming. Maybe they thought I was too busy, or maybe they just didn't know what to say to a woman who had become invisible in her own home. It's strange how people can forget history. That very kitchen, where she barked orders, was once where I taught Armin to cook. He used to pull up a stool beside me, eager to help, stirring the pot with clumsy little hands. And when the aroma of fresh curry filled the air, he'd beam and say, "Someday, Mom, when I'm rich, you'll never have to lift a finger." How easily promises fade. Now, as I stood in that same kitchen, my reflection glimmering faintly in the stainless steel fridge, I couldn't recognize myself. The woman looking back wasn't weak. No, she was just tired. Tired of being needed only for chores. Tired of swallowing her pain to keep the peace. One evening, when the rain was tapping softly on the windows, I sat alone at the dining table. A single lamp lit the corner, throwing long shadows across the floor. They were upstairs, laughing, watching some movie together probably. I could hear her laugh, sharp and carefree, and his, warm and deep, the same laugh that used to fill my heart. I sat there, clutching the edge of the table, feeling that laugh slice through me, like a memory that no longer belonged to me. I wasn't jealous. No, I was just forgotten. When you spend your life giving and no one remembers the giving, what are you left with? The next morning, I woke up early, before dawn. I walked out into the garden. The air was cool and smelled of wet soil. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry. Really cry. Not the quiet tears you hide, but the kind that come from deep inside, from years of silence. I didn't cry for what they did to me. I cried because I realized how much of myself I had given away, and how little of me was left. A week later, a letter came. Thick envelope. Fancy seal. It was addressed to me. When I opened it, my heart stopped for a second. It was from Mr. Fahim, our family lawyer. He'd handled everything for my late husband, from our property to the small trust fund he'd set aside years ago. The letter was short, but its words felt heavy. Dear Mrs. Rahim, you are requested to attend a reading of the updated will as per your husband's final directive. Kindly be present this Friday at 11 a.m. in my office. I read it twice, maybe 3 times. I didn't even know my husband had updated his will. He had passed away 3 years ago. Or at least, that's what I thought had been finalized. Why would there be an updated will? When I told Arman, he seemed indifferent. Oh, that old thing? Maybe he just moved some numbers around. Probably nothing. But his wife's eyes, they flickered with something I couldn't name. A quick spark of unease, before she masked it with her usual polished smile. Of course, Mother. You should go. Maybe he left you a little something for your services. She said services like it was a dirty word. I simply nodded and went to my room, but inside, my heart was racing. The days leading up to Friday were heavy. I couldn't stop wondering, what if my husband had seen this coming? He had always been observant, gentle, but sharp in ways people didn't notice. Could he have known how his son and daughter-in-law would treat me after he was gone? He used to say, "A man's true face appears when no one is left to discipline him." Maybe he left something behind, not money, but truth. Friday came, gray and cold. I woke early, wore my plain blue shawl, and tied my hair back neatly. When I came downstairs, they were both dressed, surprisingly, and ready to come with me. "We'll come along, Mother," Armin said casually. "Might as well get it over with." Her perfume filled the car, strong and floral, as if she wanted to announce her presence to the world. We drove in silence. Every turn of the road felt heavier, like we were driving toward something irreversible. The lawyer's office was exactly as I remembered, tidy, quiet, lined with old books and certificates. Mr. Fahim was older now, but his eyes were the same, calm, patient, and far too perceptive. He stood up as we entered. "Mrs. Rahim," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "I'm glad you came. This matter has been pending far too long." Armin slumped into the chair beside me, scrolling his phone. His wife crossed her legs elegantly, pretending to look bored. "Shall we get started?" she said, her tone polite but impatient. Mr. Fahim smiled faintly. "In due time, madam. First, a few formalities." He pulled out a thick folder, placed it gently on the desk, and began flipping through papers. The soft sound of pages turning filled the room. My hands trembled slightly on my lap. I didn't know what to expect. A small inheritance, perhaps. Maybe some sentimental note. But something about the lawyer's expression told me this was not just about money. He cleared his throat. "Before I begin," he said, "I must inform you that your late husband made some significant changes to his will in his final months. These changes were made in full awareness and witnessed properly." Armin barely looked up. Right, sure. Just tell us what's what." The lawyer looked at him calmly. "It's not that simple, Mr. Rahim. Your father had a few things he wanted to say." Through this document. The words made the air heavier. Even she, the daughter-in-law, shifted slightly in her seat. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, glanced at me, and said softly, "Mrs. Rahim, shall I begin?" And as I nodded, my throat tight, he opened the first page of the will. The air in that little office felt thick, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. The ticking clock on the wall seemed louder with every passing second. Mr. Fahim glanced at me again, then at my son and his wife, and began to read in a calm, steady voice. "This is the final will and testament of Mr. Ahmed Rahim." Hearing my husband's name out loud after so long sent a tremor through my chest. For a moment, I wasn't in that office. I was back in our garden. He was smiling, trimming the roses, calling me my stubborn little heart whenever I scolded him for overwatering the plants. But the lawyer's voice brought me back. "To my beloved wife, Saira Rahim, I leave my gratitude and my trust. You stood by me in every storm, when there was little to stand on. You built our home with patience, not with money." He paused, looking at me kindly. My throat tightened. I hadn't heard words of affection in years. To my son, Arman Rahim, I leave the responsibility of our family name. I hope you will remember what it stands for, not comfort, but character." I heard a quiet scoff beside me, my son shifting impatiently in his chair. "And to his wife, Nida, Rahim, I leave a chance to reflect on what love truly is when there is no one left to impress." Her smile faltered for the first time. The lawyer continued, his tone deliberate. "In the event of my passing, all financial assets, properties, and the family business shall remain under a single name for the period of 3 years, that of my wife, Saira Rahim." Silence. The sound of papers rustling stopped. Even the clock seemed to pause. Arman's phone slipped from his hand. Nida blinked, her mouth slightly open. "Wait, what?" Arman blurted. "That can't be right. Everything was supposed to go to me." The lawyer remained composed. "This was your father's explicit instruction, Mr. Rahim. After 3 years, the assets may be reevaluated depending on how the estate has been maintained, under Mrs. Rahim's discretion." I couldn't speak. My palms were trembling. It wasn't about the money. It never was. It was about what it meant. My husband had seen me. Even in silence, he had understood. Nida leaned forward, her voice suddenly sharp. "There must be some mistake. Ahmed told me once that Arman would take over everything. He promised." Mr. Fahim raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Ahmed Rahim did indeed plan for that once, but as I said, he updated his will shortly before his passing. Perhaps he changed his mind." She turned to Arman, eyes wide. "Say something. You can't just let her—" "Quiet," he muttered, but his jaw was tight, his voice trembling with frustration. I looked at him. My son, my little boy who once held my hand crossing the street, now staring at me like I was a stranger. My heart ached, but I stayed silent, because power spoken loudly is fragile, but power carried quietly, that endures. The lawyer continued reading the rest, small details, conditions, instructions, but my mind was lost in the sound of my husband's words. This home was built by hands that cooked, cleaned, and cared without complaint. Let those hands hold the key until they are no longer steady. Tears blurred my vision. He remembered my hands. He saw the value I had almost forgotten myself. For years I had scrubbed those floors thinking no one noticed, but he had noticed every time. When the reading ended, the silence that followed felt enormous. Arman stood abruptly. "We'll contest it," he snapped. "This isn't fair. She doesn't even know how to handle finances." Mr. Fahim folded his hands calmly. "Your father trusted her more than any of us. That's why he left guidance, and a note, specifically for her." He handed me a sealed envelope. My name, Saira, written in my husband's familiar handwriting. The sight of it broke something in me. My fingers trembled as I took it. I didn't open it there. Some things need silence, not an audience. As we stepped out of the office, the cold air hit my face. Arman walked ahead, furious, muttering to himself. Nida followed close behind, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Neither of them spoke to me. For once, I didn't follow. I stood outside the building for a while, clutching the letter. A soft breeze lifted the edge of my shawl, and I could almost hear my husband's voice. "You'll know what to do when the time comes, Sarah." That evening, I sat in my room with the envelope resting on my lap. The sun was setting, spilling orange light across the floor. I could hear faint laughter from downstairs, forced, uneasy. I took a deep breath and opened the letter. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, it means my time has come and gone, but yours still shines ahead. I know you. You won't like that I've left you everything. You'll say it causes trouble. But trouble passes. Dignity stays. I saw how they began treating you even before I left. I knew what would come. You always believed people learn through kindness, but sometimes they only understand through loss. So keep the house, keep the business, keep your peace, and when they come to you for forgiveness, as they will, decide with your heart, not your hurt. The tears came again, quiet, steady. He had known. He had seen it all before I even spoke a word. Later that night, I walked to the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had been called. Oh, the maid, so many times, but tonight it felt different. The silver utensils gleamed, the old clock ticked softly. Even the floor I'd mopped that morning looked like it was smiling. Nida entered suddenly, her face pale, voice trembling slightly. "Mother, about the will?" I looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. For the first time, she didn't see a servant. She saw the owner of the house she had ruled with cruelty, but I didn't gloat. I didn't say anything cruel. I simply said, "Would you like some tea?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Tea?" "Yes," I said softly. "You must be tired." She didn't answer, just stood there, confused, before walking away quietly. That's the thing about grace. It unsettles those who expect vengeance. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I thought about everything. The years of silence, the humiliation, the small kindnesses that went unseen. And now here I was, holding the power I never wanted. But power wasn't the lesson. The lesson was worth. And sometimes, worth isn't proven in arguments or revenge. It's proven in patience. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Ahmed. You taught them, and me, what love really means." The next morning when I woke up, the house felt lighter. The same sun, the same walls. But everything looked new. For the first time in years, I felt peace. Not because of the money or the will, but because I had finally remembered who I was before they made me forget. And though I didn't know what part 3 of this story, my story, would bring, I knew one thing for certain. The woman they called the Maid was finally home. The room was so quiet. You could hear the clock ticking against the wall. 1 tick, 2, 3. Each one felt like a heartbeat that didn't quite belong to me anymore. My hands were clasped in my lap, still trembling, almost detached from me, as the lawyer cleared his throat. He was a thin man, with kind eyes, the sort that tried to smile even when the moment didn't deserve it. He unfolded a set of papers, the corners slightly bent from years of handling too many stories like mine. Stories that ended in words no one wanted to hear. Beside him sat my son, Asad. I hadn't looked him in the eye since that morning when I overheard him tell his wife that Ami's time has passed. And across from me, poised, perfect and cold, sat Rania, my daughter-in-law. Her legs crossed, her manicured nails tapping softly on her phone screen even now. She didn't even pretend to put it away. She wore that same faint smirk that had followed me around for years. That smirk that said, "You're beneath me." That smirk that had made me feel invisible in my own house. The lawyer looked up once, sensing the tension that filled the room like static before a storm. "Mrs. Khan," he said softly, nodding at me. Mr. Khan left a very clear, very detailed will. He wanted it read in your presence, and only in your presence. Rania shifted. Her eyes flicked toward Asad, who just gave a small shrug. She wasn't expecting that. Neither was I. My late husband, Rahim, had always been a quiet man, thoughtful, calm, and more observant than anyone gave him credit for. Even when he was sick, he'd notice small things, the way I tried to hide my exhaustion, the way Rania would roll her eyes when I served tea, the way Asad had begun to pull away from me. That day, months before he passed, he had taken my hand and said, "Let people show who they are, Nahid. Don't rush to defend them. Just, let time speak." And now, time was speaking. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. He began to read. "This is the last will and testament of Mr. Rahim Ahmed Khan." His voice was calm, practiced. My heart wasn't. It thudded so loudly that I could barely hear his next words. "I leave to my beloved wife, Nahid Khan, all rights, ownership, and authority over the family residence at 27 Gulshan Avenue." Rania's head snapped up. For the first time, the smirk vanished. She turned sharply toward Asad, who froze, his mouth parting in disbelief. The lawyer continued, unbothered. "Along with the adjoining property purchased under my name 3 years ago. I wish for her to live in peace and dignity for as long as she desires. No one is to contest this." I swallowed hard. My chest felt tight. The house. Our house. The one I had scrubbed, cooked in, raised my son in. The one where I'd been called the Maid. It wasn't just brick and paint. It was memory. It was everything. The lawyer paused to take a sip of water. The silence in the room was unbearable. Then he continued. And what came next sent a ripple through the air. "To my son, Asad, and his wife, Rania, I leave the remaining assets, accounts, and business shares with one condition." Rania leaned forward. "Condition?" she said, her voice sharp, brittle. The lawyer looked at her, then read slowly. "They may inherit only after 6 months, on the condition that they have shown continued residence and care toward my wife, Nahid, within that period. Should they fail to do so, all remaining assets will be legally transferred to the Rahim Ahmed Foundation for Women's Education." The words echoed. 6 months. Care toward my wife. My eyes welled up. I didn't know whether to cry, laugh, or simply breathe again. Rania's lips parted in disbelief. "That's ridiculous. He can't do that," she snapped. Her voice cracked like glass. The lawyer merely folded his hands. "It's a legal document, Mrs. Assad. He certainly can." Assad said nothing. He just stared down at the table, his face pale, his jaw tight. The lawyer continued reading smaller details, minor accounts, personal items, some donations. But I wasn't hearing him anymore. All I could feel was the throb of my pulse in my ears. My husband had seen it all. He had seen me. For years, I thought he hadn't noticed how Rania dismissed me, how Asad let her. I thought he was too sick, too tired, too far away to care. But he had been watching, quietly. And now, from beyond the grave, he had spoken louder than any of us. I don't know how long. The reading lasted. When the lawyer finally said, "That concludes the will," the room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, without looking at me, Rania stood up. Her heels clicked on the marble as she stormed out, muttering something under her breath. Something about games and old women. Asad followed her slowly, though not before glancing my way. For a moment, just a moment, I saw my little boy again in his eyes, the one who used to bring me flowers from the garden and say, "Ummi." You're the best cook in the world." But that moment passed. He looked away. And then, I was alone. The lawyer gently closed his folder. "Your husband was a wise man, Mrs. Khan," he said quietly. "He loved you very much." I nodded, my throat too tight for words. When he left, I just sat there, in that same chair, for a long, long time. The afternoon light poured through the curtains, casting golden lines on the table. I traced them with my fingers. The same fingers that had served tea, folded laundry, and wiped silent tears. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the maid. I felt like me. Later that evening, I walked through the house slowly, each step echoing memories. The living room where I once sat with Rahim, his laughter filling the air. The kitchen where Rania had once told her friends, "Don't mind her, she's just here to help." The garden where I used to plant jasmine until she ordered the gardener to replace it with imported roses. And as I stood there, the wind brushed against my face, soft, almost like Rahim's hand again. "Live in peace and dignity," he had written. I whispered "Why?" But peace didn't come easily, because I knew Rania wasn't going to make it easy. Not after what she'd just lost, not after realizing that the maid was now the owner of the house. I could almost feel the storm coming, in her footsteps, in her silence. But this time, I wasn't afraid, because I finally understood something Rahim had tried to teach me all along, that dignity isn't given. It's taken back. The night after the will reading was the quietest one this house had heard in years. No arguments, no laughter, no footsteps pacing down the hallway. Just silence, thick and uneasy. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker outside. The tea in my cup had long gone cold, but I held it anyway, like a habit too old to let go of. From the other side of the house, I could faintly hear voices, low, sharp whispers. Rania's and Asad's. "She must have known," Rania hissed. "She must have manipulated him before he died. How else would he—" "Enough," Asad interrupted. "Don't talk about Abu that way. Then explain this. He left her everything that matters. He left us the business?" "With a condition," she spat. "Serve her? Live with her? What am I, a nursemaid?" Her words cut through the stillness, but they didn't wound me the way they once would have, because this time I wasn't the one who needed to defend myself. This time, the truth spoke for me. I turned away from the window, closing my eyes for a moment. I wasn't angry, not anymore, just tired. Tired of the noise, the cruelty dressed as civility, the way I'd been made to shrink just to survive under my own roof. For years, I'd thought that forgiveness meant pretending it didn't hurt. But Rahim's final act had shown me something else. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about reclaiming peace. And I was finally ready for that. The next morning I woke early, as I always did. The house was still asleep. I made breakfast, not out of obligation, but because it brought me calm. The smell of cardamom tea, the soft hiss of parathas on the pan, they reminded me of a time before pride, before distance, before pain. As I set the table, Rania entered. Her eyes were red, from anger, not tears. She didn't greet me. She just stood there staring at the teapot like it had personally offended her. "Good morning," I said softly. No response. Then she muttered, "You must be enjoying this." I looked up slowly. "Enjoying what, dear?" "This," she gestured vaguely toward the room. "The drama, the pity. Everyone's going to think you're some saint now." I took a breath. "Rania, I don't need anyone's pity." She laughed. A dry, bitter sound. Of course not. You've got the house, the money, the last word. I shook my head. I never wanted a last word. I only wanted peace in this home. Her eyes hardened. You'll get your peace, don't worry. 6 months, right? Then we'll be gone. You can have your perfect little palace all to yourself. She turned to leave. Rania, I called softly. She stopped, didn't turn around. Do you remember the first time you came here? I said. You were so nervous you broke a cup. You apologized a dozen times. I told you it was just a cup, that homes aren't built from things, they're built from hearts. No answer. I continued. Somewhere along the way you stopped believing that, and so did my son. She turned then, slowly. For a split second I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or pain. But it vanished as quickly as it came. She left without another word. Days passed, then weeks. Life settled into a strange rhythm, polite silence, forced smiles, separate meals. Asad tried in small ways. He'd help carry groceries, ask if I needed anything from the store, but his eyes never stayed on mine for long. He was a man torn. Between love and pride. Between guilt and the woman he'd chosen. And I didn't want to fight anymore. Instead, I poured my energy into something else. Rahim's foundation. The lawyer helped me set it up properly. We started scholarships for girls who'd left school to care for their families, and a small workshop for widows who wanted to learn tailoring. Every time I visited the office, I felt Rahim beside me, his quiet approval, his belief that kindness was stronger than bitterness, and in a strange way, that work healed me. Not the money, not the title, but the purpose. It was around the 4th month when the shift happened. I was in the garden one morning pruning the jasmine vines. The air was cool, the flowers heavy with dew. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow, hesitant. Asad? He nodded, hands in pockets. You still take care of these? I smiled faintly. They take care of me. He looked down. Rania wants to move out early. She says it's uncomfortable here. I stayed silent. He exhaled. She thinks you're punishing her. I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't the confident man Rania had built him into. He looked like my son again, unsure, remorseful. Asad, I said quietly, I never wanted to punish anyone. But tell me something. When she called me the maid that day, what did you feel? He flinched, his jaw clenched. I didn't feel anything, he admitted. I thought it wasn't worth a fight. And now? He hesitated, then whispered, Now I can't forgive myself for not saying something. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. Then learn from that, because silence can hurt more than words. He looked at me then, and for the first time in years, his eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Ami, he said. I didn't reply with anger, or with triumph. I simply opened my arms. And when he stepped forward, I held him, not as a son who'd failed, but as one who was finally finding his way back. Rania didn't stay much longer after that. One morning, she packed her things quietly, offered me a curt nod, and left. I didn't stop her. Some journeys, I've learned, can only begin after people leave your life. As the car drove away, I stood by the gate, the wind, tugging at my dupatta. There was no victory in my heart, only release. I whispered a prayer for her, not out of habit, but from genuine hope that someday she'd understand what dignity really meant. Months later, when the Foundation's first batch of girls graduated, I sat among them. their laughter ringing through the courtyard. One of them, a bright-eyed girl named Syra, handed me a small card. On it, she'd written, "Thank you for believing in us. You gave us back our future." I smiled, my eyes stinging again. As I looked around, at the sunlight, the flowers, the sound of joy returning to life, I realized something profound. I had spent years being called the Maid, but maybe that wasn't an insult. Maybe it was the truth. Because a maid serves, builds, and keeps things alive. And that's what I had done all along. Only now I was no longer serving out of duty, I was serving out of choice. And in that, I found the kind of freedom that no will, no inheritance, no apology could ever give me. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I returned home. The house felt different now, lighter. I made tea for myself and placed 2 cups on the table, like I used to. "One for you, Rahim," I whispered with a small smile. I took a sip, closed my eyes, and breathed in the scent of jasmine from the garden. For the first time in years, it didn't smell like loneliness. It smelled like peace. Weeks later, the lawyer visited again with some final paperwork. Before leaving, he smiled and said, "Your husband would be proud, Mrs. Khan. You've honored his will in more ways than one." I smiled back. His will wasn't just on paper, it was in how he lived, and how he taught me to live. When he left, I walked to the window, the same window I'd once sat beside in sorrow. Now the world outside looked brighter, and as the wind brushed against my cheek, I whispered softly, "Thank you, Rahim, for letting time speak."